Educational Skills Policy Development Committee. You've had the agenda circulated. Item 1, apologies for absence.
From Councillor Oliver James, Chair.
Oliver James, any others? If not, we'll go on to item 2, disclosures of personal prejudicial interests. Anyone? And go on to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. They've been circulated. Do I have a proposal of the correct record?
Yes, Chair. Yeah.
There's proposing. Anyone second?
I second it, Rob. Sorry, my mute is on.
Okay, and I'll sign them in due course. Which takes me on to the main item. Item 4, discussion and review of evidence and the information submitted. And I think that in addition to what we've got before us in the minutes of the last meeting and previous meetings, I know Helen has an update for us on, I think, discussions at national level and will need to inform discussions locally. Helen, is that fair?
Yes, Chair. What I've tried to do is bring together our local thinking so far and the national update, really, in terms of recovery in education. So,
can I ask you to if the committee is happy to accept a presentation from Helen, and we will use that as the basis of the discussion for this afternoon. So it's over to you, Helen. Sorry, Mike. You're on mute, Mike.
I was just agreeing, that's all. Sorry.
Okay. It's over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask Gareth if he's willing to put the PowerPoint presentation on screen for me, please.
Can you see that now?
Not yet, Gareth.
Right, okay.
Nothing so far, Gareth. Okay, shall I try and share my screen, Gareth, if it's not working?
No, it was there just now and it's gone, unfortunately. Is that, can anybody see that now?
No, Gareth.
Sorry,
Gareth, you'll have to allow Helen to share the screen.
Okay. Is that okay, Gareth, if I take over the screen?
To,
yeah, thank you. I'll do my best.
Sorry.
Has that appeared for people?
Yes.
Yes, good.
Good, okay. So as I said earlier, this PowerPoint presentation gives us an opportunity really to reconsider some of our local thinking so far in terms of what the committee has discussed, but also bring into the mix some national updates in terms of recovery in education. So I'll move to the next slide and hopefully that's working. Is that okay? Is everybody seeing that?
Yep.
Okay. So in terms of the emerging issues at a national level, there are 5 of them. And I just wanted to highlight really with a little bit of depth each of those 5 issues. So the first one refers to insecure foundations for learning, and as a result of COVID, the likelihood that the foundations for learning, and I'll explain exactly what I mean by those in a minute in the next slide, can actually present us with a problem in terms of the loss of learning and the loss of the readiness for learning as well as a result of this crisis that we are currently in. The second theme then in terms of emerging issues is lack of progression. So that progression could, and I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but there could be a disadvantage for learners for life really. We have evidence that suggests from previous research in education that if the quality of teaching and learning is not good for 2 years, that can have a dramatic effect for life on children. So we know that that could present us with a problem. The third issue then is the current demands that COVID has presented on the profession and how we recover from that, given that we have a landscape of education reform as well at the same time. The fourth issue, the emerging issue there, is that obviously we've heard in the last committee about vulnerable learners, and the challenge faced by certain learners is obviously more because of their vulnerabilities. So that needs to be explored at length. And the fifth emerging theme there is the system that we currently operate in terms of education, not just in Swansea, but across Wales. The system is under pressure anyway. Education is a heavily pressurised part of society in terms of how it works, and the intricate parts of the system needing to work together is quite a challenge at the best of times. So if I turn to the next slide, we can see what we actually mean by insecure foundations for learning. So those insecure foundations come in many guises, and the first one is around mental health and resilience. And we heard about this in our last committee in terms of what that means to us in Swansea and the impact on families and children and adolescents in particular. Research tells us that female adolescents have been badly affected by the current crisis. The next element in terms of foundations for learning is the level of confidence. So the effect of home learning and homeschooling over a number of months is bound to affect the confidence of our learners. So that is a key consideration. The next element is motivation and self-efficacy, and that's absolutely a key consideration for us as part of mental health and well-being and readiness and preparedness to learn, not just at the early years level, but certainly at the exam group level as well. So that motivation is key really to reinvigorate that motivation in our learners as they return properly to education in the future. The relationships in terms of foundations for learning really need to be unpacked, because the impact of parents working with their children at home and the continuity of that is key really, because the positive effects of parents helping their children more in the crisis than they ever have before could present us with a good opportunity to build and capitalise really on that relationship with parents. However, parental relationships and expectations have been quite challenging during these times as well. So that's something we need to consider very carefully. Obviously, the physical health of our children and young people in Swansea, and indeed nationally, is a key concern in terms of being physically ready to learn and to be healthy and fit, not just mentally, but also physically as well, to make them not just being able to get up in the morning and to go back to their normal routine, their physical routine, that will need to be reset as we enter a recovery period in earnest for education. And then the last element of foundations for learning really is the enabling skills. It's things like communication, problem solving, the skills that transpire all curricular areas, and skills that our children need really to develop as young individuals who are ready to face adulthood and the world of work. So that's the first consideration. The second one then, if we go to the third slide, sorry.
Helen, if I get control, I may be able to do the slides for you.
Okay.
Is that?
Yes. Do I need to do anything?
You may need to allow me.
Okay.
No, I don't think that worked.
Okay, have the slides popped off the screen? Yes, okay. I can see Bev nodding, really apologetic about that. I'll try and put it back on now.
Apologies, I thought I was trying to help.
Okay, so have the slides appeared now again?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're
There's
on the
something coming up on my
presentation.
screen, Gareth, that request control. So is that coming up on yours that you can do it? In my menu on the top, I've got request control, so you might be able to do that, Gareth. I'm just wondering.
It didn't work, I don't think, for Helen, unfortunately.
Right. Okay. No problems.
Okay, so I guess what you're seeing is the slide sticking in one slide and not moving forward. Is that right?
We're on the same slide, Helen. We're on the
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. I will circulate the slides afterwards, obviously. I'm not sure what else I can do because I was having problems before the meeting, but I'll see if I can resolve it again now and start from the beginning. I think at times like these, you've just got to keep calm, haven't you? So if you bear with me, I'm going to stop presenting and start again.
You sound unflappable.
Okay, right.
The only consolation is, Helen, as we all have issues from time to time, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's quite rare, but I knew I was having problems first thing this afternoon, so we'll see if this works now. Okay, bear with me. That looks promising. So you will have seen slide 1. Can somebody comment in terms of telling me the slideshow is moving forward? Is it?
It is, yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I
We've
think
seen slide 1.
we're cooking on gas. Okay.
There we are.
That's
Okay.
it.
We're on
So,
learner's lack of progression now.
Great. So the second element that's been discussed at a national level, and indeed we've touched upon it in our committee discussion so far, is the lack of progression in terms of that being an impediment for the rest of their lives. So that's something that we really need to consider carefully. So in terms of barriers to development, this is particularly pertinent in early years year groups. So for the early years, language acquisition, the ability to communicate and socialise, if those early years opportunities are not there, obviously there is a knock-on effect that can be disadvantageous for the rest of those pupils' lives. In terms of the key enabling skills, and I touched upon the enabling skills in the last slide, enabling skills are to do with communication, they're to do with problem solving, and they're the skills that transcend really the whole of the curriculum. But also gaps in knowledge. So the key bits of knowledge, particularly in the early years groups and also in exam year groups, knowledge that's missed and may never be regained. So that is something that we need to consider, especially as those older learners then progress onto further and higher education. In terms of the quality of learning afforded during the times of pandemic, obviously across Swansea we know this to be true, and we also know it to be true at a national level, is that quality of learning has not been consistent. It would probably be impossible to gain a level of consistency across all our schools in terms of that quality of learning. So the progression really in terms of the learners is absolutely key, and as we know, the skills progression in particular is something where you would ordinarily in a school have almost a spiral curriculum where you keep revisiting and consolidating on skills and applying those skills across a range of subject areas. But the ability to to have that progression because consolidation of skills has been impaired by the pandemic. Obviously, the breadth of the curriculum, we know that there was a relaxation in terms of the expectations around the current statutory curriculum, particularly in the autumn term. And that breadth was not there during the autumn term. Indeed, the focus had to be on the well-being of learners, particularly during the months of September and October in 2020. Obviously, the normal preparation for exam year groups has not been in place, so that has thrown the exam year groups upside down in terms of their preparation. Obviously, we won't have exams this year, we'll have centre-determined grades, but obviously that preparedness for exams and how that will affect their future education is something to consider as well, positive and negative. Obviously, some opportunities in terms of enriching the curriculum and opportunities you would have that are extracurricular have not been afforded during this time and may never be regained. So that's a key emerging issue that we need to consider. The next one, I'm hoping the slides are moving forward now at a pace. So in terms of the profession, and when I say the profession, we talk about all school staff in terms of teaching assistants, teachers and leaders, and the demands made on them during the crisis and how that plays out now and in the future is a key issue for us to consider. So for those people who think that the teachers and the teaching assistants haven't been doing much during the time of pandemic, obviously we touched upon that in the last committee, and it's very clear that the replanning and reorganisation of learning on a continual basis has called for a lot of adaptation on behalf of the profession. I would go as far as to say that we've had 7 waves really of resetting education in Swansea since the pandemic hit us in March 2020. And during that time, each and every member of the profession has had to learn something new or adapt to new ways of working. Obviously, morale and well-being of staff is absolutely key. And I think it's never been as important as it is now. The professions, particularly leaders across Swansea, describe this pandemic as being relentless in terms of what it's thrown up and how it's challenged them professionally. And nearly everybody I spoke to last term said that they found the autumn term to be one of the most challenging terms of their whole career. So that is something that we will need to keep in check as we move forward. Obviously, what COVID has given us is so much information. I would describe it as information overload, where we've had to learn so many things that have been beyond what we were taught to do as professionals. So it's been quite challenging, really, to understand the expectations around, how to deal with the pandemic, how to deal with COVID-related matters. So that's been quite a challenge. But also all of the responsibilities that come with COVID in terms of site safety, staff safety, and keeping everybody safe. We're very proud in Swansea that we've been able to have such a good response in terms of the health and safety executive, which we touched upon in one committee. I'm sure that they visited us and they could see that, out of 10 providers, nearly all of them, had good or better results in terms of how they prepared for being as COVID secure as possible. Obviously, every time there's a wave or there's an expectation, those operational expectations and pressures come to the forefront again. So all of these waves have a huge impact on the profession. The administrative pressures as well are immense. So as an example, I would say that obviously the TTP now of staff, the recording of positive cases, all of that brings a new administrative burden and new ways of working that we hadn't envisaged before the pandemic. But also against this backdrop backdrop of COVID, we have education reform, and we have obviously the new curriculum for Wales, as well as the additional learning needs reform. Before the pandemic, recruitment of teachers was a key consideration and a key challenge. And since the pandemic, it's clear that the challenges for the profession have made people think twice in terms of where they want to be with their careers. I've heard a lot of leaders, head teachers, say they're very tired and that they are considering their future. And indeed, some teachers have found it very challenging to adapt. We haven't done any research on that, but certainly it's a key theme on an anecdotal level. And also the finances, having to understand really what grant monies mean in terms of the short term, and how we can use the recovery monies, some of which we heard about this week, how we can use those to strategise and not just have a knee-jerk reaction, but actually use the finance and the budgets that we have to make a lasting impact in terms of our recovery in education. So go to the next slide, we're halfway through. And as we looked at in the last committee, obviously our vulnerable learners have greater challenges than others. So I won't go into any detail around the types of groups of vulnerable learners, but additional learning needs learners, they will have been more challenged by this crisis than many other groups in terms of access to services, the types of interventions and services they would normally have enjoyed in schools. They haven't been able to access those as effectively at home. I've already mentioned early years in terms of the impact on the loss of learning in terms of their development and what we may need to consider going forward with them. Examination year groups have been hit hard in terms of not knowing what was coming, and then trying to understand really the conditions for those centre determined grades this year and how those will work and what types of evidence needs to be provided to get the grades that they require. The loss of learning in terms of Welsh medium education is quite profound. So for Welsh medium learners who come from an English speaking family, the impact on them in terms of their education has been significant, and we know that. We have a number of families choosing mid-year now to consider their position with Welsh medium education and actually transfer to English medium primaries in the main to continue their education using just English medium as opposed to their Welsh medium education. Equally so in EAL, English as an additional language, we have families that have been severely challenged really in terms of communication, understanding what's going on. So that's been a key consideration, not just for us in Swansea, but in other urban authorities across Wales as well. The actual transition for children entering secondary education for the first time has been quite a difficult one. The sense of belonging in particular has probably been lost during COVID in terms of the normal activities they would have enjoyed by face-to-face transition activities, both in year 6 and in year 7. So it's been a very odd experience for those learners. And also localised disadvantages. And when I say localised disadvantages, I think we need to consider that some of our schools in Swansea have probably suffered more loss of learning than others because of the pandemic and how COVID has affected their cohorts in terms of positive cases and the need to self-isolate. So that is clearly not consistent across Swansea. So the next slide takes us into the 5th issue, or the emerging issue, I should say, in terms of what's been considered nationally. So there's a national acknowledgement, and this is quite welcome actually, that the system is under pressure and is probably under pressure before COVID anyway. But on top of the normal pressures in the education system, the call for people to adapt and to change constantly has been quite difficult. So for some of our schools, adapting and being agile to that change and being able to pivot at a time of crisis has been easy. And for the others, they found it very, very challenging. And that will have a detrimental effect then in terms of their resilience. In terms of digital technology, we've had opportunities and challenges because of this, but certainly the expectation in terms of digital competence and the use of technology going forward, the expectations have suddenly increased. So we need to be very mindful, really, that we have the capacity to continue to do that, and the strong investment in Swansea gives us a good platform to do that well. As I said before, the relationships, both in terms of how the local authority interfaces with its schools, how schools interface with parents, and the communication between pupils and their schools is something we need to consider, because some of those relationships have been lost, some of them have been strengthened, but I think we need to learn about those relationships and how we can build on them for the good of children and young people going forward. So the professional capacity in terms of the ability to continue to enjoy professional development, we hope that's continued on a digital footing. But in terms of the profession being able to move forward and understand the expectations that are still ongoing in terms of education reform and the current expectations, because we haven't fully returned to education yet. So all of that, has an impact really on people's professional capacity. There's only so much they can absorb and keep on going. But the scale of what has changed in education during the last year, it's almost to the year really, in terms of when we started to go into the first lockdown. This has given us food for thought. It's given us a big challenge, but the scale is enormous in terms of what's been undertaken. And how education will look in the future, I think we can all agree that it'll never be the same again. We'll never be in a post-COVID era. We'll always be grappling with COVID, and the nature of education will never be the same again. So those are key considerations. So in terms of considering the risks posed by all of these emerging issues, obviously the key risk here in terms of our local thinking is well-being, and the risk to the well-being of our future generations really. And if we don't do something about the well-being issues, particularly the mental health issues, it will give us a further crisis down the line. In terms of inequality, the long-term effect of this, if we don't do anything to address inequality, then it'll just increase and the gap will widen. So we have to consider that very carefully. And obviously the impact, the economic impact really, in terms of how education supports the economy and the long-term losses that we may face, we have to bridge any gaps now really and build that into our recovery plan. So just to close then, obviously we have to have, and we do currently have, a recovery plan in education for the immediate, long term and medium term. But I think we need to consider some of these national considerations as part of our recovery plan as well. And anything that this committee recommends probably should be in line with those 5 emerging issues, because they're what we've been discussing so far. But for me, in terms of officer advice, I would suggest that our focus really needs to be on well-being more than anything else at this stage. So I'm happy to take questions if anybody's got any questions.
Thank you, Helen. And in a way, a depressing picture, but we asked for it to be presented as it is. And when you look at the work this committee has done over the years, the use of the PDC, the skills need of Swansea, preparing us for the new curriculum, all of that work, if we're negative, all that work is going to be undermined by this challenge. But then again, that work can inform the recovery if it's used properly. So I think that's something we've got to bear in mind and try and be positive about. I've got indications from Mike and Linda. We'll call you Mike first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, Helen, just a question, really. You touched on it in your presentation, but every year in the budget, each school is funded with a certain amount of money. Because of the closure of some of the schools due to COVID, does this mean that the schools' money pots have had, as they haven't used some of this money and they haven't spent it, would I be right in thinking that the pots have now increased to what they normally would be at this time of year? Thank you, Chair.
We haven't examined this in detail, but I think what you're referring to, Councillor Lewis, is the building up of reserves. And obviously for some of our schools, the utilities bills, for example, are something that they would maybe have saved on. But if you think about, what's happened during this financial year, as we come to the close of the financial year, I don't think there'll be large reserves in any of our schools as a result of COVID. There may be slight savings or underspends, but I don't think it's going to amount to large reserves, because although some of the premises have been shut for some of the time, it doesn't mean that they haven't engaged in other types of activities and reused their monies in different ways. So, they've also been able to claim on top of their normal budget as well. But I would suspect that we're not looking at large reserves as a result of this pandemic.
Thank you, Helen. Obviously, I'm a member of the Audit Committee as well, and obviously this is possibly a subject that would they be touching on next year. So I was just trying to sort of preempt anything that in that vein that was going to happen. Thank you for your reply. Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair.
Lyndon and then Jen.
Great, thank you, Chair. I think obviously the scale and speed of change was rushing at everyone. So to keep pace with that was a huge task. Obviously some schools performed better than others, or in different aspects of the work that they did. There was really good examples of remote learning, and obviously with the nature of there being some really good examples, there are probably less good examples in other schools. Have we sort of learned lessons from those and helped the schools that are doing less good in part of with the schools that are doing really well? And you could find some schools are doing well in one thing and not so well in others. So it doesn't need to be one school is going to be excellent and the next bad, but it's aspects of the work that they do could be good and bad. But have we sort of learned from that and shared those experiences so that we, everybody could be looking at the best examples? Not that you're going to get a situation where everything is the same in each school, because things will differ at the way they're tackling things. And secondly, obviously there is an element of catch-up, and how do you think that is going to take place? And thanks very much for the presentation too. It was really, really useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. In terms of the dissemination of good practice or effective practice, we've done that systematically in both primary and secondary sectors. So we've got a level of confidence, excuse me, that we've got schools that have benefited really from learning about the good practice of other schools. In terms of refining practice and improving, because everybody's had to learn something new and they've had to continually improve and not rest on their laurels. I think the best examples we've got in terms of refinement have been where schools have engaged with their pupils, their students and the parents to try and gain some feedback. And we've tried to encourage our schools to do this because we recognise that's probably the best way of improving. So they've continually refined on the basis of feedback they've received, and that's been very helpful. Obviously, logistically, for some schools, it's been really difficult to offer good remote learning or good blended learning because staff have been affected. And at any given time, you know, you can have staff off. So for some schools, it's been quite challenging, but certainly we're confident that they've benefited from learning from that good practice. In terms of catch-up, what I don't want catch-up to look like is an over-assessment of pupils. So obviously we'll have by mid-April across Swansea nearly all our children and young people back in education, and hopefully that'll be the last wave in terms of being in and out of schools. I'm crossing my fingers and touching every piece of wood I can get my fingers on. But what I don't want catch-up to be at that stage then after mid-April is the over-assessment of pupils to find out what they've lost. There has to be some kind of baselining, some sophisticated baselining to find out what needs to be built on. But I want children to come back and acquire those readiness to learn skills, those preparedness for learning skills again. The ones that I referred to in the PowerPoint, really, it's about getting those skills right and the attitudes right as well, and the mental health and the physical health right. So I would like our schools really, and I'll be sharing the PowerPoint with the schools shortly, is to try and focus really on getting that foundation for learning right. And it's not about the foundation phase, it's the foundation for recovery. And if we can do that consistently across our schools and acknowledge really that the children need a focus on their mental health first before they can start to learn, then I'll be happy as a director. It's not to say that we should just focus on well-being and let everything else slip, because we have to have a balance, don't we? So we need to ensure really that well-being comes first, but then we can recover and prepare well for the new curriculum, because that will come at us very quickly. But I think the new curriculum is a good opportunity really to do the things that COVID has taken away from us. I think it'll give us an opportunity to accelerate the principles and the core aims of that new curriculum across our schools. So it gives us a good opportunity to delve deeply into that new curriculum and the expectation it affords.
Great, thank you, Helen. It's probably building confidence in the children as well, and the teachers getting back to school. Thank you. Yeah.
You know, we talked about well-being. We've talked about strengthening learners' ability to learn. You know, making them more effective learners. And I think that all of that learning is going to impact on this and contribute to it. So I think, you know, it's something we can build on there. But I think we have to recognise what these children have lost in what is best part of a year off school, isn't it? I know they've lost a year of the normal experience anyway. I'll call Jen and then Jan in.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points. One, in response to Mike Lewis's very sensible question, because I think there was an assumption that schools' reserves will have risen. But of course, if you bear in mind, schools have not been shut. They've been open during the holidays. They've been doing other things. Staff are being repurposed. And although we have been able to claim some costs back, we haven't been able to claim everything back. We're still slightly arguing about the cost of reclaiming free school meals when free school meals pupils have been sent home. For months and months, we couldn't claim the full amount back. We will have to cover the first £12.50 or thereabouts of the £19. And also, I'm mentioning this because we looked at this at the beginning of the year. When you start taking out the one-off grants, and they are one-off grants which could disappear, and often they have been arriving we've met it before in highways and other areas, very short term, here's some money, spend it the week before, and really all you're doing is paying off your overdraft. We haven't seen much by way of gain at all. But on to the main issue here. Last week, the Welsh Local Government Organisation hastily convened a meeting of Education Cabinet members to listen to 3 people whose names probably mean more to Helen than it did to any of us: Kevin Palmer, Georgina Hayhoff, and Christopher Owen, who summarised the situation as they saw it in Wales about the state of education. And Helen has done a really good presentation in line with what they were saying. The only thing she omitted was one of the points raised was in transition. It's not just about 6 and 7-year-olds. There's also big concerns for year 10 and 11, how we move them on. And although Helen is primarily responsible just for statutory age education, the view we are all encouraged to take is from early years through to further education, employment and higher education, and further on discussion with employers, especially large global companies who have more of an idea of what the future skills are than many small local businesses. And the other strong message was catch-up is not something that's going to happen by summer holidays or even Christmas. I think we're looking at a minimum 3-year period, which all those elements, early years through to universities and people taking on apprenticeships, will be putting in support, education and skills development as part of that ongoing package. Because I think it's been said umpteen times, we can't leave it till you're lying in your hospital bed with a doctor looking over you and you think, oh, you were the poor sod that missed out on the education. That education has to be put back in on that person's journey through life. So I think Helen's basic message to us falls very much in line with what's being looked at across all of Wales, and indeed certain parts of the UK where they're allowed to consider these things in more detail. But I just want to tell everybody this is not just a Swansea issue, it is a all Wales issue, and there will be all Wales support. We've already had one grant, which I think runs from this September into the next school year for catch-up. Catch-up is a horrid phrase because it sort of has that element of speed and risk, but it is this long return for this group of young people back to normal, and parents, because although we've got pupils anxious about coming back, we've got parents anxious that they might not have done a good job on the home education. The number of parents who phone me up in a blind panic, I can't do these equations, and you think, chill out, nor can I, but let's talk through it. And by the way, I think your child knows more about it than you, but that is one of the big pressures. Home education has been really useful. Many families have enjoyed it, but it's put a lot of strain on families, especially those who try to totally compensate for the loss of school. Doesn't happen. But Helen is right. We are part of a national movement, and we are in a very strong position in Swansea digitally. We have a good practice of upskilling our staff. Our staff are very good at saying, I need help in these areas, but they are shattered. So I think we need to take this really carefully. Well-being has to be the critical thing for all of us, rather than sitting pupils down and testing them. I had one reports from one primary school that was testing every week during the autumn term. Parents were really concerned about that pressure because it had a negative effect. I bet everyone in this room has feigned an illness in their childhood to get out of a spelling test or a tables test, something like that. And if you haven't, I don't believe you, because you would have done subconsciously. But we have to take every child along with us, and I'm very confident that we can do this. But let's bear in mind, this isn't a quick fix. We're in a long haul here.
Okay.
All elements, early years, through to higher ed, everyone now realises exactly what the problems are. Thank you.
John, and then I'll call Des in.
I think Des was before me. Rob, he's had his hand up for quite a while.
Sorry, I can't see everyone. That's the problem. So
That's okay.
thank you for alerting
No,
me to
Des
that.
has been working quite a while. So.
Okay, yeah, I don't keep members longer than necessary. Thank you, Helen. Very interesting presentation. It's what I had going through my mind. I was going to ask you about the wider picture, and yet that's exactly what you've covered. The term I picked up on was progression, and I think that's extremely important for all children, right across the age range or that we're catering for. And that's, I think, the key. Some schools will provide progression better than others, and I think that covers the part of that Lyndon mentioned. Can some schools learn from others' success, or some are doing things more right than others, if that's the correct terminology. The other thing I'd like to mention is the problems that many young children are going through, psychological problems, and I think it brings it home to us lay people that just how much importance young people put on education, which perhaps we didn't realise. We hear so often about kids skiving off, mitching, everything to avoid education in school, and this has completely turned that on its head. There's so many children really think it's so important that they are suffering psychologically because of the lack of it, and I suppose it's the fear of being left behind or not being able to achieve what they want to achieve. But it just shows that, you know, the things that are going on in young people's minds, and that is going to be a big hurdle for us to overcome, but something that we really need to help children to you know, to overcome because it's a health issue, isn't it? And but it just shows how they think, to me anyway. Yeah.
John.
Thanks, Rob. A lot of the elements I wanted to say have already been said, Rob. But just to mention, you mentioned change, Helen, that they've had to adapt to. I'm in awe of all of you that have had to adapt, because we have, in normal life, have struggled with all the changes that have come day in, day out. We're adhering to different things all of the time. But as a governor of 2 schools, I'm in awe of the teachers and the way they've adapted and the way they are dealing with these children. So I just want to pass on my thanks to you and your staff and all of you that are having to deal with all these constant changes that you're having to do all of the time. So just on behalf of myself and all the rest of my governors, thank you very much for all the hard work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Ben.
Thanks. One thing I'm not sure of, and I think it's something we might be able to influence locally, is you mentioned the importance of enrichment programs. And we've been really good, I think, in terms of bringing people into school to do music, art, drama, and taking our pupils out to places they might never have go as a family, art gallery, theatre. My understanding at the moment, when people start going back next Monday and then after Easter, we still haven't got a clear picture of if we can start engaging with those activities, because those were all really good for developing confidence and well-being, because they were part of, but not formally part of the education.
Yep.
Yeah, it's unclear, Jen, in terms of what's permissible and not. Obviously, that cautious return to education is at the forefront of our minds, that we want to do it sustainably. We don't want to come back out of education once again. But I do welcome, you know, the idea that we should be bringing visitors back into our schools as soon as we can to build that, what they call in England, the culture capital, in terms of ensuring that all our children, no matter what their background is, that they enjoy, you know, the arts and learning about culture in particular, and that they have those opportunities to be creative as well, and that creativity.
You've gone on mute, Helen.
On mute, Helen.
Sorry. So I do welcome the fact that visitors coming back to build on cultural capital in our schools is something to be welcomed when it's safe to do so, and as quickly as we can, so that those children have those creative experiences.
Yeah. And you know, we're lucky, and we city and county of Swansea, the natural environment, the opportunities there are. You know, we've got 2 universities, the sports facilities we've got here, the clubs, the arts venues we have, galleries and so on. You know, we've got things that we can utilise as part of this. So we're in a very fortunate position there. I'll call Mike in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, Helen, it's just an inquiry really. As the children are now returning to school, can you assure us all that the cleaning regime, disinfectant and the like for COVID, is still going to be maintained whilst this pandemic is still with us? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, the cleaning of high-touch areas is part of the operational guidance and risk assessment for our schools. So that regime continues. That's no different to what it was like in the autumn term. And as long as we have enough cleaners to do so, then that will happen. That high-touch area cleaning will continue.
Thanks for reassuring me. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to comment on Helen's presentation? Can't see everyone, but say no forever, keep your peace. I take that as no one's got their hands up. In terms of where we move forward from here then, Helen, because you know I'm aware of the recovery plan and the way that you've put a lot of meat on the bone in today's meeting. So I think it's what's realistic in terms of helping us to move this forward as a PDC. And as a PDC input into the recovery plan and strategies more broadly in the city and county. What I would suggest is that if you could work this up into a draft report, circulate it to the committee, and then after we've read it, we'll have another meeting to go through that and consider what the draft that you'd have prepared. I'm also aware, if the committee is happy to proceed with that, and anyone think of the contrary? Are the committee happy to proceed on that basis? I see people nodding, which brings me to my next point, that I'm aware that we've had a number of apologies for the meeting due to be held on the 14th of April. And I think, you know, it would give you, if we didn't go ahead with the 14th of April, it would give you a little bit more time to perhaps get something by May for us, early May. Would that be, you know, is that doable given the other pressures on you, Helen?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we'll aim for April, and if things slip, then May will always be on our side. So I'm hoping that we'll get a draft report circulated in time for April. But I acknowledge, if those apologies are standing, then the meeting won't take place at all. Well,
I'm thinking, Gareth, if I bring you in here, I mean, is there a way of either postponing or delaying the 14th of April meeting?
Yes, Chair, you know, if committee are minded to do so, we can postpone the April meeting till the middle of May. Obviously, it won't be the beginning of May because we've got the Assembly elections, but possibly the 12th or the 19th, because obviously we haven't got PDC schedule for May because it's a new municipal year, or then we'd be looking at June then. So whether we'd have a special in May.
Well, would this work then that we'd schedule a special meeting on about the 12th of May, the second Wednesday in May, whenever I think it is the 12th of May.
Yeah.
But then if a draft could be circulated in advance of that meeting, and that we do that instead of meeting on the 14th of April. Does that make sense to members?
Yeah. Yes.
And in terms of you, Helen, do you think that's doable?
Yes, absolutely fine. Yeah.
So we'll proceed on that basis, and a draft circulated that we can all mull over, and then we'll come back on the 12th of May with comments and with a view to preparing a draft to go to cabinet then. Jen and then Mike have asked to indicate they want to speak.
Thank you. I was just about to say thank you, Chair, and to the committee, because one of the noticeable things about the Education PDC is you have taken ideas through to a report which has gone to Cabinet, which means when Cabinet accept it, it becomes policy and we can resource it then.
That's right.
I've been a bit concerned about some PDCs which have produced a letter of good intent, but because it's never gone through our constitutional process, it's never been part of what we can actually fund. So if I think would it be your third or fourth report from this panel committee, it would be really useful because it means we can make it policy and then resource it.
Good. Mike?
Yes, I was only going to say, I think it's an excellent decision to scrub next month's meeting because members and officers, and especially officers, have been working non-stop for almost a year now, without any holidays and without any holidays you can call as a holiday because we're all in lockdown. So I think it's an excellent idea to give everybody a break next month and just come back afresh then in May.
Yeah, so, I echo that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if we had that meeting in May, then that would feed into the June meeting of Cabinet. And
I think that time scale then would work, I think. So are members happy with that?
Yeah.
Everyone's nodding?
Yes.
Unless anyone's got any other business, any matters they want to bring up, can I thank you all for attendance? I think we've had another constructive meeting and we've got a good way forward now and a work plan moving forward to the spring. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.